The F1 Pod on Off the Ball with Chicago Town Pizza.
Formula One?
Yeah, we go to town on it.
Okay, you're very welcome along to the final episode of the F1 Pod for this season. It's episode 20, and a lot of fireworks towards the end of the season as well in Abu Dhabi at the weekend. Max Verstappen claiming a 19th victory out of 22 Formula One races in 2023 at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix last weekend. We'll look back on that in this episode and on the season as a whole, I guess, as well. We're delighted to have, as usual, with Bernie Collins, the former head of race strategy with Aston Martin, and we have the motorsport journalist and broadcaster Declan Quigley as well. Bernie and Declan, how are things?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Good, Shane. Yeah, good to be here.
We were just chatting before we started, Bernie, about the end of season. Like when you were working with Aston Martin, and even now, I guess, in the media end of things, everyone thinks, oh, sure, once the final race ends, that's it. You have nothing else to do. But sometimes there can be little bits and bits of testing, I guess, after the season ends as well.
Yeah, sure. So we had one day of testing, just after Abu Dhabi. I think some people ran two cars. That's still a lot of data to go through with those young drivers. And you sort of try and take, from a team side, a look back at the year, what you did right, what you did wrong, any summary stuff for the drivers, what they can learn into next year. So you definitely have a few busy weeks trying to wrap up those final few things before you get into your Christmas break. And I think that's the same for all of us. You see the end goal and you've got there, but then there's still those little projects that you've signed up to that you've maybe forgot about that you're trying to finish off.
Season's too long. 22 races. It could have been 23. I mean, it would be 40 if they could get the. You speak about the fireworks at the end of the season. There were quite a lot of fireworks in Abu Dhabi. Actually, I was quite impressed with them at the very end. I thought they were trying to do a Vegas thing, but didn't quite get there. But generally, yeah, absolutely, everyone's knackered, aren't they? I haven't gone through the season the way you've gone through it, Bernie, but it's too much. It really is, and I think they killed a golden goose. We were looking at. You gave us a couple of topics to look at, Shane, ahead of this, and I'm trying to remember the races from 5-6 weeks ago. I mean, it's like they come like an avalanche. And once upon a time, to win a Grand Prix was this amazing achievement, and would be feted and heralded. And at the end of the year, you could remember all the winners, and this was this special thing that had happened in your career. But now they come thick and fast. It's almost like the old NASCAR season. That it's just tomorrow's chip wrapper, isn't it? And you can't remember it a week later. Yeah.
What do you guys think the sweet spot is? Like, Bernie, for you, in terms of as Declan says there, the season's too long. Like, what is the sweet spot?
I sort of felt working at sort of the 17, 18, that was fine. That was manageable. I think from a personal point of view, when you get into triple headers, that's too much. When you're 3 races on the bounce, that's too much. So yeah, you need to definitely not have that in the season. I think next year we've got 2 of those planned in to finish the year, which is just, a horrendous way to finish the year, really. So, that's my limitation, is I would never do a triple header, and you're sort of looking at 18, 19. And even this year, although it has been a very busy year, we've finished pre-December, even finished the test in pre-December. And there's something quite nice in that, not running into that final month.
Because I was just checking there, Declan, for the Daniel Ricciardo quote from last week. I caught on the hop, asked about the fact that there's going to be a triple header scheduled next year towards the end. You've Las Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, one after the other in the 2024 F1 season. And his response was, "What? No chance. We'll be exhausted, especially at the end of the season." That probably just sums up how the drivers feel.
I've got a theory that, I was just sort of looking at driver performances from the year and stuff like that. And, Daniel Ricciardo came in, damaged goods, absolutely destroyed. And everyone's going, well, he's coming back in. No, and he's flying. And then, you saw the same a little bit with guys like Hulkenberg and I'm trying to think, Magnussen, and guys who were spat out of Formula One, came back in, absolutely went really well. Maybe they were just a bit fresher. They hadn't spent endless amounts of time on the treadmill of traveling and doing these race weekends, going through the routine and the process. And there are some that can do it week in, week out. I mean, I go back to Alonso and Hamilton, who just have this extraordinary ability to go back to the well week after week. But I wonder if there isn't just a sort of an element of burnout, and guys come back refreshed, have a couple of races where they're flying again, and then they maybe settle into wherever they are, after that.
Yeah, it's funny, Bernie, because even I was watching ITV yesterday. We're covering the UK Championship in the snooker, and they were talking about Ronnie O'Sullivan's longevity and how he's still able to go and do what he's doing at 48. And I think about lads like Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton, and it is, as Declan says, it's the ability to keep going back to the well and to to almost just be able to stick out the season better than some of the younger lads sometimes.
Oh yeah, and like we've seen it. I think even this week there was discussions of various drivers being sick. Some of that have come from Vegas and the time shift and what was sort of required there. But yeah, those guys that are fit
What
to.
happened in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's not what I was referring to, but anyway, it's just those guys are better fit to look after it, and maybe some of those guys feel more in a position of strength, as any of us do going through our career, to just say no to the extra requirements, to just say no to some of the marketing stuff or whatever, and prioritize their health or their, that management a bit more, because they all have, some of the best physios that we have around working with them, trying to keep them on top of things. But just walking through the paddock in Vegas, people were just broken. And that is, what's been required through this season, and the people that manage that better are getting the best out of themselves for the entire year. Racetracks
are way bigger than they used to be as well. So the sheer act of walking through a paddock, I mean, you walk kilometers. A modern racetrack like Abu Dhabi is about 5 times the size of, the old Monza or somewhere like that. So you'll just get way more steps. But no, I mean, I'm being slightly flippant. I wonder about the logistics of the teams as well. I mean, I know they rotate personnel a little bit these days as well. I mean, the logistics of trying to drop people in, reintegrate them, sort of pull them out again. I mean, it's too much. I just think that they will kill the golden goose ultimately,
Yeah, that's the danger, isn't it, with the sport, that they follow the money, but maybe don't think about the bigger picture sometimes. But the quotes from Toto Wolff as well recently, Bernie, he was talking to both of you maybe on this one. He was talking about missing some of the older races, like we've seen Miami come in, we've seen Las Vegas, Saudi Arabia in recent years. But there's a lot of those older tracks that we're just not getting to see on the schedule anymore. Are there any in particular that you guys, maybe start with you, Bernie, that would like to see back, the nostalgic ones that you maybe miss?
Oh, I don't know, to be honest, because some of the ones that we used to, you think of sort of Hockenheim or Nürburgring or any of those ones that we used to go to. Every time I went there, it was freezing. So I never really, didn't really miss
it. It's always snowing at the ring, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I just remember sitting on the pit wall just feeling cold. So there's a lot of the races, I don't know, for personal reasons, maybe don't miss, and maybe differently as a spectator, but part of me feels we have to embrace some of the new ones with the new audience. A lot is made of the fact that we've 3 American races, but look at the size of America compared to the size of Europe. So if we started to say we had, I don't know, whatever it is, 10, 12 European races and then compared it, it's a bit different. Obviously those flyaway ones are harder on drivers, on everyone involved. There's some countries that are notably missing. I think Lewis Hamilton came out and said we don't have one on the African continent, which I sort of thought, when I look personally at myself at all the places that you've been and the countries that you've been to, that's one that I've missed just for that reason. So we need to make it maybe a bit more worldwide, which maybe isn't a popular opinion.
Yeah, would you go along with that, Declan?
Oh, 1,000,000%. I mean, Kyalami was an amazing racetrack back in the day, wasn't it, in South Africa, at altitude, and anything that has a bit of elevation, anything beside a mountain. The old Oostenrijk ring was extraordinary. It's funny what we get nostalgic for, because I remember when Hockenheim came in the 1970s, everyone was like shocked, horrified. It was like 2 chicanes, big long straights, the track that killed Jim Clark. And then when Hockenheim disappeared from the schedule, it's like, or actually they shortened it, didn't they? They got rid of the big long straights and gave us the short stadium section, and everyone's going, oh, we missed the old Hockenheim. So the kind of, and again with the old Nürburgring, got to get rid of that. Everyone's getting killed. Go to the new Nürburgring. Oh, it's anodyne, it's boring. And then when that disappears, it's like, oh, we haven't been to the Eiffel Mountains in a while, Mm-hmm. So it's things shift a little bit, but there were too many races in Europe. It did need to change. It did need to get to different continents. It's completely outrageous we don't go to the African continent. It just shows you. I mean, it's a money game. I mean, I thought it was funny in Las Vegas that Max Verstappen was outraged about the razzmatazz and all the glitz, and I was going, oh, it's like buying a house beside an airport and giving out about the noise. It's like, you're in Formula One. This is your game. If you don't want that, go to the Walter Hayes Trophy, because that's better motor racing. It's super entertaining. You'll have a great weekend. You just won't make as much money.
Yeah. 100%. The mad thing about the F1 pod this season is like as I said, 19 of the races have been won by Max Verstappen, and we end up not really talking about Max Verstappen because it's just a procession. Or ordinarily we just think, well, we'll talk about the other topics because we can't be talking about the same thing every week. But I mean, Bernie, the performance of this guy this season, was it late 80s in the percentages of win percentage this season for Max Verstappen. It's just been insane.
Yeah, I think it has. And, someone described it as you're seeing as close to perfection as we've got in a while in terms of the car, in terms of the team, the strategy, the pit stops, everything is just working perfectly. And like we've just spoken for the last, 5 minutes about, the season's relentless, and just a little lapse in concentration, a little lapse in a pit stop, someone being sick or ill or whatever. And, the team has had that. People have missed races through illness or the rotation of people, and to keep that consistency there week in week. Now they have a bit of margin because the car is fast, so they can have a slightly slow stop and get away with it, but we're not seeing any howlers. And one thing, from a pure engineering point of view, to have produced such a fast car that's reliable is very difficult. There have been many seasons where we've seen really fast car, loads of reliability woes, not finished in the race, whatever. And I don't think, someone correct me, but I think, Perez's car has not finished potentially through incidents or crashes, but I don't think the Red Bull hasn't finished a race all year through any reliability niggle. And to have a car at that level with that strength is pretty impressive.
Yeah, the consistency of pace as well. I mean, the opposition started the year being dominated in every. I mean, it's a terrible year. If you want to, the problem is not Max Verstappen. The problem this year was Sergio Perez, because in previous years we've had massive dominance from other teams. I mean, obviously '88 is the obvious comparison, with McLaren winning all but one of the races. But of course, then you had a great old battle between Senna and Prost. And in sort of recent years with Mercedes dominating, but it was a good old set to between Hamilton and Rosberg, and Bottas was able to back him up a little bit. Even in the Schumacher dominant years, Barrichello was right about there, wasn't he? Felipe Massa was there, and they were frustrated at having to sort of kowtow and contractually obliged to back him up and all that. And even Perez himself a couple of years ago. But this year, 2 wins in the first 4 races, a couple of poles from the first 5 races, and then gone. And was it that the car changed a little bit and he couldn't get on with it, but the head dipped, didn't it? And that's what ruined the year. I mean, I don't want to rain on Checo's brakes. He's probably not in top form. Not that he cares much about what I'm saying anyway, but in reality, that's what killed it for us. And it's not Max Verstappen's fault. He is unbelievable. Exceptions, yeah. Right car, right time, right guy. Everything is just, and that consistency, yeah. Because very often a car will, I suppose, you'll get it into a performance window, and you've got to be able to keep it there. But what happened, I suppose, with the opposition is they got faster in qualifying as the year went on. He ended up with 12 poles, which sounds pretty good to me on a regular year, but actually is against 19 wins out of 22. And most of his good qualifying performances, I think, were in the front half of the year, and then things started to happen a little bit for Leclerc and others in qualifying. But they had an amazing race car, and he's just delivered the consistency extraordinary.
We've had the usual rumors of Lewis Hamilton to Red Bull in the last week or so, and I mean, Lewis Hamilton again denying claims that he approached Red Bull about a move. So the quotes from Christian Horner in the papers that saying there had been an inquiry from Hamilton. Hamilton then says he did not contact Red Bull. Horner had reached out to him, suggesting a meeting at the end of the season. It's just brilliant, all this stuff, Bernie, isn't it? And even then, Lewis Hamilton's comments about Max Verstappen, he says, I would be more than happy to race against Max in the same car. It would be wonderful. I don't think he wants me to be his teammate. And then Verstappen's response was, what would it add to know? It's not happening. There's no point to make up stories if it's not happening. So it's intriguing to wonder what might happen in that scenario.
Yeah, it is. And it's a really interesting one. Like, where did the leak for that come from? Because, obviously it's put Hamilton in a bit of a difficult position with Mercedes, but every driver at the top of their game is going to be having those discussions. And if they're not doing it themselves, and I can't believe Hamilton himself walked down to Christian Horner and said, oh, I'm interested in the seat, but you'd send someone, or someone will ask, and what classifies an inquiry And like
Mhm.
how, if it is, the rumor is Anthony Hamilton maybe went and spoke to him, but if he just asks in the pit lane if there's a seat available, is that an inquiry or is that just finding out if Checo's in or out? So it's just, there's so many, it's a lot being blown out of proportion, I think, really. It would be interesting to see them in the same car, but I think, so many people haven't done well in that Red Bull, the second seat in Red Bull, because they can't drive the car in the way that Max does. Could Lewis? We don't know. But, it's probably more interesting to see if Mercedes can up the game and get a car equally as good. And then you might have two different cars very suited to their drivers. But yeah, I love the back and forth all weekend. There was this back and forth. You said this, I said this. It's just a bit childish, really, isn't it?
Just a
I
little
mean,
bit.
it's just pure. It's just Christian Horner, isn't it? He's just stirring it completely, 100% Red Bull, because there isn't a driver. I mean, as you said, Bernie. I mean, when it's contract time, you go and find out what you're worth. So you got to find out what the number is. So, if you really, really, really want to drive for Ferrari, you'll go up and ask them, and you'll say, "Listen, I'm interested. What's on offer?" If you're not necessarily interested in leaving in your current team, but you want to find out what you're worth, you'll send one of your minions, your staff, or maybe your dad, and they'll just ask a sort of a polite question. You'll get some vague notion, and then you can have a chat with your current team and just say, well, actually, I have options elsewhere. I mean, it's since the dawn of time that's normal. So it's just Horner stirring it for a bit of crack, I think.
But also, it wouldn't be unknown for someone's father to go and do that without any of their knowledge whatsoever.
Yeah, especially his dad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's just, did he even know? I don't know.
Yeah, these are the conversations that go on behind the scenes that maybe we don't realize half the time. Like, Declan, who would win in the same car? I know it's a subjective question, but you put Lewis and Max in either both Red Bulls or both Mercedes cars, who's going to win?
You have to own the team. So if you, as Bernie says, would Lewis be able to drive Max's car? Well, the question is, would it be Max's car? Yeah, he owns the team at the moment, so Lewis would have to come in and adapt. And he's not going to instantly turn that team around and turn the direction of development. I mean, we saw that in 22. George Russell had a really good start to the season, and then Lewis drove the direction. He made consistent demands and then brought the car back to where he needed it to be. And then he started to dominate George Russell towards the back end of 22. George is actually the disappointment of the year for me. I thought that this was might have been his time. I'm a massive Lewis Hamilton fan of his the way he sustains that performance. But I thought, given his age, that it might be George Russell's year. But what did they 11 all in qualifying? Hamilton, twice the points. It hasn't been quite the year it might have been. Now, he did finish the year pretty strongly, George Russell. So, I mean, it could change in a heartbeat next year. But at the moment, Lewis Hamilton owns his team, Max Verstappen owns his team, and you don't just drop in and go. It would be hard to imagine that Lewis would, especially given his age, 26 against 106.
Yeah,
Lewis
it's amazing.
Yeah.
The disappointment of the season for you, Bernie, like as Declan says, George Russell possibly could be picked for a lot of people. Who really kind of left it out there, for you this season that maybe didn't quite reach the peaks of where you thought they'd get to?
I think there's a few probably up and down the grid. I agree with what Declan said. The Mercedes split is interesting, and it's interesting the age thing when you mention it, and Hamilton's race being better than his qualifying, because there's a lot of theories out there that qualifying is the first thing to go, that quick reaction time that you need for a fast lap in quali. So look at your stats again for that at the end of next year and see if the split has changed again. I think, again, as Declan said earlier, we hoped in those first 5 races that Perez would really bring the challenge to Verstappen. And that was where our interesting competitive year was going to come, and that didn't happen. And I was a bit surprised maybe at the start of the year that it was as close as it was, particularly in those first few races, but then it did really tail off. And not that I expected more going into the season, but those first 5 gave me hope that it would be quite a tight season and it would be really interesting to watch. And that ended up being reasonably disappointing.
Yeah, really, really was. I mean, it promised so much for Sergio Perez. I remember chatting at the start of the season, and Perez was the go-to man. We were all praising him so much, but it just didn't quite materialize. The race at the weekend in Abu Dhabi, guys. I guess the moves between Ferrari and Mercedes were the real talking point towards the end of this $10 million battle for that extra place in the Constructors' Championship. What did you make, Bernie, of the ploys from Ferrari towards the end? I guess to give the place back to Perez as well. I guess it made sense at the time, just didn't quite pay off.
Yeah, it didn't pay off probably because they didn't do it early enough or didn't think about it early enough. And I find it fascinating that that seemed to be driven at least from the car, not from the pit wall. Um, that's think of the capacity, the mental capacity to be thinking, I can make this happen without quite losing my own race. And there was a few other things that happened, in terms of starting Carlos on the hard tire was an interesting decision because that doesn't often work out very well in Abu Dhabi. You're trying to do that longer first stint. So could they have done something a little bit better there? Like the pace didn't look great, but how much was the tire in the first stint? But and that sort of comes down to that last race. Everyone puts a lot of focus on the points that you bring away from the last race, whether that's going to be P2 or P3 in the championship or something in the drivers' championship, whatever it is. And it's difficult. It would be difficult. They'll feel difficult to have lost out by so little. And they'll look at that race and scrutinise that race. But a lot of what the strategists will be doing at this point of the year is scrutinising every race. I would imagine those points are easily found at many other positions during the race for both teams. Mercedes would be looking at what more margin they could have had. Ferrari would be looking at what they should have picked up. So it's not won or lost in the last race, although all the focus comes down to the last race and those decisions. But
it's winning time, isn't it? That's the time when you've got to be able to stand up and do it. I mean, it's the last few minutes of a football match. It's the last few minutes of a basketball thingy, whatever they do. That's the moment when people do crazy, stupid things or they do amazing things, and that's what always fascinates us about sport. So Leclerc was extraordinary. Verstappen too. I mean, he was calling strategy for Perez, who was in 11th position, and he was working it all out for him. The pit stops and things. It's extraordinary how those guys they have the capacity to take it all on board. I thought it was a great old go by Leclerc, but yeah, really. I mean, where were the strategists on the pit wall at that moment?
Yeah, it's an ability it's squeaky bum time, I think, wasn't it? Alex Ferguson called it for Manchester United. It's an ability to do it on those last pressurized moments, or in Formula One, the last lap or two of a race. Is that an interesting one for you, Bernie? The fact that calls are being made quite clearly from the cockpit of the car as opposed to the pit wall sometimes, or do you I guess as a race strategist just sit back and go, okay, well, the driver can see things possibly that we can't from here sometimes, so you just let it slide.
Definitely, sometimes they've got a bit of a bigger picture. You're really focused on your data, so they will often come up with ideas or something different. Or sometimes, the management in the pit will come up with something saying, "Oh, have we considered X, Y, Z?" That type of thing. We've seen it a few times in Abu Dhabi. So Sargent held back Ricciardo. They had a very tight battle between Williams and AlphaTauri. So he spent something like 5 laps defending in a car that was slower but at good straight line speed, because he knows that they weren't going to score points, but he could try and prevent Ricciardo scoring points. So that was, that's happening up and down the grid. But it's not the first time we've seen it to be critical from Ferrari that it's been called from the car. We had Carlos Sainz with Norris trying to defend position in the closing laps of Singapore. That appears to be driven from the car. And it's just about having a bit more foresight. Perez has got the penalty. What can be done safely? And we might have missed the start of the conversation. I've not listened to it all myself post, but there have been quite a few times where you sort of feel a lot's been driven from the pit wall, or lots been driven from the car, even in terms of fundamental pit stop decisions being questioned. The trust there between the cars, both cars, and the pit wall still doesn't exist. So there's still a lot of work to be done. I think Fred has started to correct some of that. It's definitely less than we've seen in previous years. There have been some moments of genius from the pit wall. So yeah, work to be done going into next year, 100%.
Is it a paralysis of decision making? Is it is it a management issue?
I think so.
Is it that everyone's afraid to I mean, presumably the ideas are in there, but they're not able to sort of articulate or say we need to do this now.
I was very fortunate in my career that when we decided something from a strategy point of view, it was very rarely the management got involved. Very rarely were the Otmars of this world or anyone saying, "Oh, I'm not sure about that." You just cracked on with your decisions and you did the analysis later. I think in Ferrari, there's a big hierarchy that is going through many steps before it's making that to the radio, which is often why on safety cars we see a lot of indecision, because it's just not, the process is too slow, I think. And this is just outside. I don't actually have any basis for this. Just listening to the radio, it feels like things are happening too slowly. I don't believe they're bad strategists. I just believe that too many people, there's too many cooks that are all got their opinion on what way they should do, and it's not, the decisions aren't being made quickly, rapidly, and then analysed fully. And I think Fred's helping that. But I also heard an interesting theory recently that said, moving a Ferrari, people see that as a lifetime career. You're in Ferrari, that's where you're going to, as engineers, as strategists, that's the pinnacle of where some people want to be, and they want to stay there. So there's a lot of not rocking the boat, I think, and not saying, oh, I disagree with XYZ's decision. And you need that. You need that on F1. You need the lowest power strategist to be fit to say, oi, have you thought about whatever? And it feels like people aren't using their voice enough to speak up. But I've never worked there, so I don't know. It's all guesswork.
That's a really interesting one. Yeah, you need to have that sort of environment that you have to be able to speak up and have the just the desire to say something. But I see what you're saying. Like, if you're in Ferrari and you think you've got that job for life, then maybe that might stifle some people, Declan, into not speaking up, I guess.
Isn't it amazing the way the DNA of racing teams passes down from generation to generation? You would have thought that the mindset, the thinking, I mean, that sort of a super hyper political atmosphere prevailed in Ferrari in the 1950s and 60s. You go back to the Dragoni team manager, Machiavellian tactics. I mean, that's a slightly different. It's a lot different, but still, the idea that everybody wants to just hang on to their job, no one wants to rock the boat. I mean, you see, even saw it this year with Aston Martin. I mean, they one of the big disappointments of the year was Aston Martin. They started the year absolutely flying. It's the old Jordan team. I mean, it was exactly the same in Eddie Jordan's days. They didn't develop. Whether they didn't have a plan to, or they didn't have the money to, or they didn't have a structure to, and the car was minging. It kind of made a bit of a comeback the last couple of races, but isn't it remarkable the way we see these kind of stereotypes and this DNA, this sort of circulating through the generations? I think it's extraordinary. Yeah,
it's quite incredible. Guys, we'll take a very short ad break. We'll reflect further on the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and, of course, give out the rest of our awards for the 2023 season in the F1 calendar. The F1 pod on Off the Ball, brought to you by Chicago Town Pizza. Real takeout taste for less with Chicago Town. It's myself, Shane Hannon. We have Bernie Collins and Declan Quigley. We'll be back in just a second. You are very welcome back to episode 20 of the F1 pod, the final episode of the season. We're reflecting on the season as a whole and, of course, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix from the weekend just gone. We have Bernie Collins, the former head of race strategy with the Aston Martin Formula 1 team, and Declan Quigley as well, the motorsport commentator and journalist. Guys, I mean, it's been quite a season for Fernando Alonso, ups and downs. Bernie, I guess your old team, Aston Martin, will be glad to hold on to him. I think there's talk of I know his contract runs out at the end of 2024. There's talk of extending that. I think one of the articles I read on Fernando this week said life begins at 43. He's just an amazing guy.
Yeah, I think the strength that he's shown this year, the start of the year, it was really positive, lots of good results. Fernando's definitely leading that as well. And then through the year, when the car appeared to get worse, if anything, let's say the upgrades look more like downgrades that went on the car at times, Fernando was still fit to hold on to that a bit more than Lance was. So he was fit to wrestle the car around and get, some consistent points. But they've got to feel really disappointed with the P5 championship position compared to where they were. It looked really strong at the start of the year. They were in P2 for a good amount, and those points early on really held on. And exactly like Declan said, we've been many years in the past there where we gained loads of points at the start of the year, and then it was about trying to hold on, maintain that through the year, and that doesn't appear to have changed, except that whatever they've done in the last few races, it's that performance is back, not quite on the podium, but back a little bit. And it is just, can they do that development race? And that's, if there's some fundamental misunderstanding in the car, that's going to be very difficult going into next year. But I think Fernando is hanging on the coattails a wee bit there. This is probably where he's going to finish out his career. Let's see, I'm making assumptions there. But the sort of ambassador role or whatever it might end up being with Aston Martin probably looks pretty appealing. Let's see.
Another driver.
He could run the team. He could buy the team. Because Lance is bored now, and as we've seen in every underage football team in the history, when the kid gives up, then the folks aren't there available to volunteer anymore. So yeah, I don't know. That's I think they've got a nice little car company there, so maybe quite fancy set hanging on for a little while. The Stroll family, but Fernando Alonso, yeah, extraordinary. I wouldn't give him a long-term deal though, would you, at 43? But like last week or last Sunday in Abu Dhabi, he's doing this crafty little lift and coast semi brake test thing with Lewis Hamilton. His motivation, his competitive instinct is absolutely incredible. If you could if you could bottle it. Yeah.
I did hear from someone in the team that he's generally the last one out of the office. It's really hard to shift him out. He's so determined to stay and learn and improve. So definitely he's not lost any of that focus, like Declan says.
I wonder what he'd be like as a team principal. He has a reputation as being a slightly divisive character. That he doesn't always bring the team with him the way that he might do. There have been criticisms leveled at him over the years in that direction, but he might just be so, imperious and so, on top of everyone that everyone would turn up to work early, everyone would work late. Would you be like Jean Todt? I'd probably be a bit slightly different than that, but I think he does have a fascinating future in the sport beyond driving. But he's not finished with driving yet. My God, he's extraordinary. Yeah.
Maybe the campaign starts here for Fernando Alonso as team principal. Yeah, I like to see it. The another driver, when you're looking back at all the race results this season, Carlos Sainz, the only non-Red Bull winner of a race as well, Declan. It's such a surprising stat. We never thought we'd see that at the start of the season. But if you look back on Sainz's year as a whole, it's hard to even his weekend in Abu Dhabi last weekend, he gets the big crash in practice, doesn't get beyond Q1 in qualifying. Starts 16th in the race. It's just a bad race for him generally, but it's just been a funny season.
Yeah, it hasn't been a great year for Carlos Sainz. It was kind of a bit unfair really that he got the win, because you kind of think that Charles Leclerc dominated him a little bit, semi-dominated him a bit in Ferrari across the balance of the year. So seems to have the edge at the moment. Yeah, let's not paper over the cracks too much. It was a minging season, really, in reality, wasn't it? That 21 of the 22 races were won by the one team. Harks back to 1988. And look, we will have periods of dominance. It is the nature of motorsport in general. It's the nature of big time sport in general. You have teams will dominate, but it was I'd say the Drive to Survive generation are suffering from a little bit of PTSD now. They don't know what's going to hit them. This is what motor racing really looks like. Sometimes it's just a bit dull, and you've got to find the race a little bit further down the field. And for Carlos Sainz, good recovery drive in Vegas. Everyone felt sorry for him after the drain cover thing, but yeah, it's been an average season really. I wonder, is Charles Leclerc really at the same level as Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton et al? Is he teak tough? Is he strong to that level? He is amazing though, isn't he? He's pretty, and he's got that team going for himself at the moment.
Yeah, that's another interesting hypothetical kind of conversation in your head. Like if you had Leclerc in the same team as Max, the same car, how would that fare? But yeah, I think you're right. There's probably there's a slight gap there, maybe, but it's certainly not much, you'd imagine. It's probably just experience, really, Bernie, isn't it? The gap between Leclerc and the other two, possibly.
I would have said I thought Leclerc was maybe a wee bit behind, but you don't have the data for that either. I think, like Declan says, there have been times where Carlos has been fit to bring it to him a bit more this year than what we'd have expected. Carlos has a few unfortunate things. He obviously got the win, which Leclerc probably feels a bit devastated about. And, the running theory is Leclerc too nice on track? Is he given too much space, or not taking the chances where they're throwing at him? But yeah, that's maybe a bit of that's experience. I think I often look at the raw pace in qualifying is not necessarily experience. That is a given, or that is at least an attribute. Whereas the race pace, the managing the race, the holding on to it, the managing the tire degradation, that's more experience. That's more where a driver's learning, or not to have the hot-headedness that we've seen of Verstappen when he was very young. And I don't see any of that from Leclerc, so I don't really know where the experience is going to gain him loads, but maybe that's just not enough foresight on my behalf.
I was looking at the first corner, and Leclerc got a really good run at Verstappen in Abu Dhabi. And you're sort of thinking, well, it's a DRS era, isn't it? And Verstappen has this amazing racing car. So maybe Leclerc's just thinking, I'll just try and stay with him in the first stint. You'd never know. But there was just something that he could have got past, couldn't he? I mean, he could have, would Fernando Alonso have, he would have gone in all guns a-blazing and just seen how it all worked out at the end.
Especially because we know that Verstappen has been cautious turn one, lap one this year, because he knows he has the margin. He knows he's going to get him at some other point in the race. So if there's ever a time to get Verstappen, it's early in the race at the moment, because he has matured to this point of going, it doesn't matter lap one, I'll get him lap 3 or 4, which is still true. But your best chance of beating him is to be ahead. Clear air is always the preference.
You're there and break the DRS toe, and then you're in the race. If you're just following him, because that's how Verstappen manages the race, isn't he? That's the modern way, isn't he? He just sort of slowly catchy monkey through the first stint, and then the race evolves after that. Is it? Am I oversimplifying? I need to oversimplify by times. Yeah.
No, that's good. Yeah. It's a good phrase.
Yeah. I like that description. I do. The awards for the season, it's probably, we've kind of already mentioned the biggest disappointment. We'll fly through some of the others. I guess driver of the year, guys, I know it's hard to look past Max Verstappen. He was the driver of the year, let's be honest. But Bernie, maybe start with you. If we look beyond Max, who has kind of really up to the ante this year, I guess?
Well, there's a few up and down the grid. I'll just pick one, and then Declan hopefully have some of the others that I thought of. But the one that stands out to me, and I was thinking more of, overperformed the car. Got results way better than I think the car deserved, and that was Albon. I think Albon's really driven the car this year. He's scored all of the points, I think, for Williams bar 2, and they've managed to finish P7 in the championship with a car that arguably doesn't look P7 in the championship. And that's consistency in qualifying, consistency in the race. So I think, and for someone who didn't do well at Red Bull, he's really matured into that car. So I thought Albon was a pretty good shout.
I suppose that stat that kept coming out in the last couple of weeks was that he whitewashed Sargent, and the last person to get whitewashed in qualifying across the season was Albon against Verstappen. So there's that big question mark: is Alex Albon really all that? You kind of wonder. I'm sure with Williams they're wondering, wow, maybe we really did have an amazing car this year. So you just not 100% sure. But you can't argue with dominating your teammates. And he did that. The other sort of standout performer for me, probably in the surprise performer category as well, was Yuki Tsunoda. He dominated. I think he was 16-6 in qualifying against his various teammates. 4-3 against Ricciardo is probably his strongest teammate. Again, it's not all about qualifying pace, but he wasn't crashing this year, was he? He wasn't falling off. He wasn't bouncing off people. He finished all but one race. I think he had a good excuse for that. So it was I thought a really strong season, scored a lot of points. And for a guy that he's a figure of fun, but there's sort of in the English speaking world, there's a tendency, I think, sometimes for sort of a little bit of disdainful lack of respect for people from Asia. And I've noticed this going back to Satoru Nakajima days and before Tetsuya Kisawa, and anyone came over from Japan was sort of a curiosity and by times a figure of fun and could be patronized in different days. And I think sometimes as well, Tsunoda doesn't get maybe the respect he deserves. His career, and partly the feeding into this a little bit perhaps might be that the only championship he ever won was a Japanese Formula 4 championship. Took him 3 years to do it. He didn't really have a stellar career in the lower formula. He was third in F2, and then he's come into F1, and it's steady Eddie. It's a sort of a Niki Lauda career in that, as much as he's kind of evolving and has had a great year, deserves a bit of a shout out.
Yeah, for sure. That surprise performer of the year, Bernie, I guess it is a similar enough conversation to driver of the year, but was there anyone who really jumped out, given maybe the lower expectations they might have had heading into the season?
Again, quite a few, but probably my pick is Piastri. I think there was a lot said about how good Piastri would be. There was a lot of hype around Piastri. Obviously, there was all of the back and forth about what team he was actually going to join and a lot of competition for him. But to get into we all rate Norris, I think, in the McLaren. The McLaren started the year terribly, but Piastri's brought it to him on a number of occasions, particularly in qualifying. Needs to work on the race pace, definitely. The points don't really represent potentially at times how close they were, but I think he's done a lot better versus Norris in that car, versus, given the hype.
Yeah, well, that's a fair point. The race of the year, I mean, I guess it's a different conversation, Declan, to the best race we've had in terms of the venue and the fan experience and all the rest. But for you, what was the best race of this calendar year? I know it's hard to hark back to March and think of them all, but for you, what stood out?
I looked at a couple of them. I mean, Monaco was interesting, wasn't it? But I mean, it was wet and ashes and all sorts of nonsense going on. Austria was good. I mean, impressive stuff from Verstappen. He had to respond to. He ended up hitting at the wrong time. They made a mistake or something of ERS, and then he ended up passing people on track. Whoa, so that was exciting. I think Vegas was probably the most enjoyable, most entertaining, issue in doubt towards to the very end. Lot going on. It's a funny old thing, isn't it? I mean, years ago, the FIA said that we've got to, or whoever it was, send Pirelli off to create these tires that wouldn't last till the end of the first stint. They'd only last 10 laps at the most or whatever. That's the direction they've gone over the years. But then you end up with Vegas, where they've got like mahogany tires on a glass track, and they could have driven those cars to Abu Dhabi on those tires, and you end up with a better race somehow, some way. It's kind of the law of unintended consequences. You can never quite figure out or predict exactly how these things are going to go. But Vegas was fascinating. Yeah. Fascinating in so many respects. I mean, fascinating for the way that Formula One embraced it, the way that it needed to embrace it. Toto Wolff just seems so passionate about not complaining about anything to do with the event because they were so invested financially in it. I think that was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's recency bias, is it, Bernie? Like it feels like maybe it was the race of the year.
Yeah, I think Vegas, and particularly one of the things I enjoyed most about Vegas was qualifying, because we had a very different qualifying to what we had anywhere else in the year. There was some people doing a full qualifying stint on one set of tyres, doing multiple laps. Normally we see just single lap shootouts, and I quite enjoyed the interaction of that and how people were figuring out what they were going to do. Did it need a second set? So on and so forth. And it was just such an outlier in conditions, in temperature conditions, in the tyres that we had, in how people were trying to manage it. So it really got people thinking a little bit on their feet. Which led to an interesting race. Zandvoort was another one, the very wet at the start of Zandvoort, very mixed conditions, a lot of people reacting to that. So yeah, once you get a race that you can have proper overtaking, multiple stops, and that's definitely more interesting.
Yeah, for sure. The one I want to finish on, and I guess you could end up doing an hour podcast on this question, was the FIA marks out of 10 for the season, ways to improve the F1 from next year as well. Declan, if I start with you, like what if you're a teacher, I guess, marking the exam at the end of the year on the FIA, what would you give them?
Well, that's like me marking the teacher, isn't it? I mean, what are they going to mark me afterwards?
Yeah, well.
They're going to start the year with a 10-second penalty. I don't know, 7 out of 10. I mean, they're fussy, aren't they? I mean, it's I quite like the light touch that the FIA have with regard to passes on track. Like so if someone takes, has gone off track and taken a position or whatever, they kind of just talk to the teams a little bit and say, it's almost like a rugby ref saying, stay on side. And, so they're coaching them a little bit, and they say that I think we're going to have a look at this. What do you think? And then, they do the swap. So they get the swap done. So I quite like that is a relatively light touch. But then they're kind of a little bit over fussy with some of the decisions. I mean, I thought Perez at the weekend was a little bit unfortunate. I know. I mean, according to the letter of the law, he wasn't getting it turned in at the apex. But maybe it's a factor of the mirrors not being big enough and the cars are big trucks or something. But Norris turns in and goes, there's there. Oh my God, I've been driven off track. I mean, to me that was just something of nothing. I couldn't believe he got a penalty for it, but it is the modern way. So in that respect, I think a little bit over fussy. Other aspects, I mean, it's a weird relationship that the FI have with the Formula One racing series. I mean, they're a sanctioning body, they're the rule makers, but they seem to have a very, very integrated relationship with the teams and with the promoter of Formula One. It's a three-way relationship, which is quite odd, really, isn't it? But we didn't have any huge Abu Dhabi 21 style controversies. There weren't any draconian penalties. Nobody was getting banned for 12 races. So in general, they probably did okay. It's all about rules, really, isn't it? For next year, they made a couple of little detail changes this year. We'll see. Bernie probably have better insight into what they're going to do next year and how it's going to affect the racing on track. I mean, we marked them out of 10 for next year already.
Yeah. Are you going to be strict or easygoing as a teacher here, Bernie, with your markings?
Oh, my marking's always strict, I think, unfortunately. I was going to go 6. I don't want to, we shouldn't end it on the negatives. Hopefully you're going to ask a different question after this, but the track's limits facade needs to be tidied up. Can we do something better about that? The Perez overtake this week getting a 5-second penalty. We're handing out 5-second penalties for everything. Everything is a 5-second penalty. Nothing. I've never seen a 10-second penalty or drive through or any of the other penalties that are available, regardless of how strong the incident was. Arguably, the 5-second penalty affected the championship position. We have a different P2 and a different P3 because of that 5-second penalty. These rules on overtaking, whether you need to be fully alongside, is in a way influencing driving style. People are just firing it up the inside, being ahead, and then saying, "Oh, it was my corner to take," or whatever the case may be. So, I think there's a few things need looked at, how they're going to handle those things. The outlap stuff, what a mess we managed to get ourselves into a number of times, including Abu Dhabi on the outlaps. And then I think I need to reduce my score. My final thing is I don't like having so many qualifying formats. I'm not against the sprint, but the sprint qualifying is different to the sprint shootout, is different to the alternative tire allocation, is different to normal qualifying. And it just gets to a point where it's like, on the pit wall, all the different softwares, I'm sure, is a mess. But to try and explain it to the viewer at home who's not watching every week, maybe, or not fully on top of what's going on, it just, even to try and explain it to some people in the office, just a mess.
Yeah. The sprint has to decide the grid for Sunday. Otherwise, it has no value or reason. I mean, it just simply and as far as I'm concerned, it should be a reverse of the championship order.
Right.
So so that's the grid for the sprint, and then that's your grid for Sunday.
100%. Well, guys, I guess, Bernie, the positive we can end on is we're all looking forward to next year. Hopefully, it's a tighter year, calendar year, and tighter races. We'll see. Maybe less wins than 19 for Max Verstappen, but look, we're looking forward to 24 races. Begins in Bahrain on March 2nd. Feels like a million miles away, and finishes in Abu Dhabi on December 8th. But guys, Bernie and Declan, it's been a pleasure. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, I guess, if we don't see each other between now and then.
Thank you.
Hey, Shane. Thanks a million. Yeah.
Brilliant stuff. And to everyone who watches and listens to the F1 Pod, of course, we will be back next year. I guess the first episode will be to preview the whole calendar year in advance of that first race in Bahrain on March 2nd. So we will be back in 2024 with the F1 Pod. See you soon.
The F1 Pod on Off the Ball with Chicago Town Pizza.
Formula One?
Yeah, we go to town on it.